Agenda of the section. Cost management is another knowledge area of the project management. There are several activities in a project. Several project resources work on project activities, and several materials, tools, and equipments are used to complete the project scope. All these require a budget to be allocated. Because you need to purchase tools, materials, and the company must pay salaries of the project personnel, etc. Briefly, cost management knowledge area plans how to manage expenses and budget of a project, monitor and control the status of a project, and measures budget performance. During this section of the course, we will go over the content and processes of cost management knowledge area. What will be the agenda of the cost management knowledge area section? First, we will go over the cost management briefly. We will describe the important definitions, major outputs, and processes of cost management knowledge area. First process of cost management knowledge area is plan cost management process. In this process, how to determine budget, estimate costs, and manage the expenses throughout the project are planned. We will go over the plan cost management process in detail. Cost management plan is the primary output of the plan cost management process. It describes how to manage the project costs and budget. We will go over the details of cost management plan. Lifecycle costing is an important term in project management. Everything that is produced has a lifetime. Do you still use your first cell phone? Most probably no, because in today's world, most of the technological products have at most 2 years of life cycle. We will go over this concept in our further lectures. Value engineering is performing same work with a less costly way. For instance, if you need a bulldozer for your construction project only for 2 months, most probably leasing the bulldozer will be less costly than buying a bulldozer if you won't use it in your future project works. We will go over this concept in detail in our further lectures. Estimate costs process is the second process of cost management knowledge area. We'll go over this process in detail. Cost estimation for each project activity and tools, materials, and equipment are done in this process. And based on these estimations, overall project budget is estimated. There are different types of costs in a project. For instance, office rent for a project is a fixed cost. Regardless of how many project resources will work, you need an office, and this cost will be in your project budget. On the other hand, material costs, expenses for project personnel, etc., will be variable depending on the amount of people or materials. We will see these different types of costs in detail. Inputs to estimating costs are important, because all cost estimation are based on the inputs. We will see these inputs. We will go over estimating activities in a project. Accuracy of estimates is an important concept. If you need a crispy, clear estimation, you will need to work more on planning to reach a more accurate estimation. Depending on the accuracy necessity, estimation must be planned accordingly. Determine budget process is the third process of cost management knowledge area. After estimations are done, all cost estimations are combined during this process, and overall project budget is determined. We will go over this process in detail in our further lectures. Project budget will have components. After activity cost estimates are complete, there will be contingency reserves on top of these estimates, such as activity contingency, management reserve, etc., to accommodate any risks if they occur during the project. Control costs is the fourth and last process of the cost management knowledge area. This process mainly aims to control the project expenses and complete the project on determined budget. We will go over this process in detail in our further lectures. Progress reporting for cost management is crucial as well, because based on the previous expenses and track, whether the remaining activities will be completed with the remaining budget must be assessed frequently, and these must be reported to relevant stakeholders. Earned value management is a critical part of cost management knowledge area. Earned value calculations show whether you are ahead of budget or under budget, and these calculations are critical to evaluate whether a project will meet the schedule and cost targets. We will see earned value management calculations in detail with examples. During this lecture, we've seen the agenda of the Cost Management Knowledge Area section. During the next lecture, we'll go through overview of Cost Management Knowledge Area. Overview of cost management. Cost management includes processes required to complete the project within the approved budget. With its processes, Cost Management Knowledge Area aims to determine the required budget to complete the project, and then aims to monitor and control the project costs to meet the determined budget. Major output of the Cost Management Knowledge Area is project budget. After the scope is clear and project activities are determined, each project deliverable and each project activity will have an associated cost. Because project resources will perform activities, and they have costs to projects such as expenses, salary, etc. And there will be tools, materials, or equipment that need to be used during the project as well. These will require a budget as well. Cost Management Knowledge Area primarily concerns with the cost of resources needed to complete the project activities. After the budget is determined, cost management will keep on measuring and monitoring the cost performance of the project to meet the agreed budget. Cost management has 4 processes. 3 of these processes belong to Planning Process Group, and 1 of them belongs to Monitoring and Controlling Process Group. These processes are Plan Cost Management, Estimate Costs, Determine Budget, and Control Costs. We will go over each process in detail during our further lectures. During this lecture, we've gone through an overview of Cost Management Knowledge Area. During the next lecture, we'll go over Plan Cost Management Process. Plan Cost Management Process. Plan Cost Management Process is the first process of Cost Management Knowledge Area. Plan Cost Management is the process of establishing policies, procedures, and documentation for planning, managing, expending, and controlling project costs. There will be several project resources in a project. Several and different type of materials will be needed. Also, there might be tool and equipment necessity as well. Plan Cost Management Process aims to plan, manage, and control of these expenses in a project. For instance, for a construction project, several civil engineers, construction workers will work. Several materials such as cement, wood, steel, etc. will be used, and tools and equipment like trucks, bulldozers, and hammers, etc. will be needed. Cost management process mainly aims to determine cost of each activity and determine the budget of the project. Then, management and control of the project budget to complete the project on the determined budget respectively. Cost management plan provides guidance and direction on how the project costs will be managed throughout the project. For instance, you'll be able to see how much money you'll need in a certain phase of the project with the help of Plan Cost Management Process. Major output of the Plan Cost Management Process is Cost Management Plan. Cost Management Plan briefly describes how to estimate costs, how to determine budget, and after the budget is determined, how to manage and control costs are outlined in the Cost Management Plan. Cost Management Plan answers 2 main questions. How will I go about planning cost for the project? Cost Management Plan will guide you on how to estimate costs for each activity, each deliverable, and how to construct the overall project budget respectively. And how will I manage the project to the cost baseline? After the budget of the project is determined, cost baseline is taken. Cost baseline shows the initial cost estimate of the project, and if nothing changes in the project or if there won't be any approved change requests, it is expected that the determined project budget will be met. Cost management plan will guide you on when to spend on what throughout the project and ensure you meet the determined project budget. As many management plans, cost management plan is also part of the project management plan, which helps to meet the project goals and objectives as a whole. What does cost management plan include? Units of measure. You will estimate costs based on the amount you need from a material, and these units might change depending on the country or project. For instance, in the US or UK, generally inches are used for length, or foot square is used for the area of space. However, in European countries, meters are used for length, and meters square is used for the area of space. Since units of measure is a critical aspect to determine and estimate the cost, it must be included in the cost management plan. Levels of precision must be included in cost management plan as well. For instance, what will be the number of decimal places during calculations? This might come to you a trivial point, but if you consider the mega projects, millions of materials are used, and the level of precision might cause significant variances in total. Control thresholds must be included in the cost management plan as well. For instance, what will be the amount of budget variance to take action to get back on track? If you're managing a $1 million project, and if you set 20,000 as control thresholds, this means you need to take corrective actions if you're more than 20,000 behind the schedule. Rules of performance measurements such as earned value management technique or percent completion method for activities must be included in the cost management plan. Earned value management is the most common technique used to measure cost performance of a project, and abbreviated as EVM. Either EVM or any other method that will be used in performance measurement must be mentioned in the cost management plan. Percent completion method for activities must be included in the cost management plan as well. For instance, how do you consider an activity in progress? Generally, there are 3 assumptions for activities in progress. First approach considers them as not started. Second approach considers them as 50% complete. And the third approach considers them as 100% completed. How activities in progress will be considered must be included in the cost management plan. Reporting formats must be included in the cost management plan. How frequent will you be reporting about cost performance of the project? What will be the format for cost reporting? For instance, you will report a brief high-level cost report to senior management in every 2 weeks, and a detailed report in every month. These must be cleared out in the cost management plan. Additional details such as strategic funding choices, cost recording procedure, etc. must be included in the cost management plan as well. In case you need additional budget for your project, how to find sources should be mentioned in the cost management plan. If there are corporate tools or applications that keep track of costs and expenses in a project, these must be described in the cost management plan as well. During this lecture, we've described the plan cost management process and cost management plan. During the next lecture, we will go over the lifecycle costing and value engineering. Lifecycle costing and value engineering. Lifecycle costing and value engineering are 2 important concepts in cost management. In this lecture, we'll go over these 2 concepts one by one. First, we'll go over lifecycle costing. Lifecycle costing is looking at the cost of a whole life of a product, not just the cost of the product in the project. You might be buying a tool or equipment to use in your project. While buying it, your company must consider the lifecycle cost of the product, not just the cost in the project. It is better to describe this concept over an example. Let's consider that you will be needing a pressing machine for your project. However, your company plans to use this machine in future projects after your project is completed. Therefore, your company will buy the pressing machine instead of leasing it. There are two options for pressing machine: low quality and high quality. Low quality pressing machine is $80,000, but it is expected to pay around $40,000 afterwards during maintenance in the next years, so the total lifecycle cost is $120,000 for a low quality pressing machine. A high quality pressing machine is $100,000, and expected maintenance cost for the next years is $10,000. So in total, lifecycle cost of the high-quality pressing machine is $110,000. Now, if you consider only project costs, buying low-quality pressing machine is more feasible. But your company plans to use it in future projects. Therefore, lifecycle cost must be considered and high-quality pressing machine must be purchased. Now we will go over value analysis. Value analysis is also known as value engineering. Value engineering is, briefly, finding a less costly way of doing the same work. Please do not confuse this with reducing scope or decreasing quality to deliver project work with a lower cost. Value engineering aims to do the exact work with a less costly way. If a team is trying to decrease the costs with the same scope, they are performing value analysis. In order to describe value engineering, I will go over a sample scenario. Let's consider that you need 5,000 meters cube of wood for your construction project, and you need the first 2,500 meters cube in the beginning of the project and the next 2,500 meters cube 3 months later. However, your wood supplier tells you that if you buy all 5,000 meters cubed at once, he can make a 25% discount from the list price. You will need a total of 5,000 meters cube wood anyhow in your project, and buying all the wood at once at the beginning of the project is less costly. Here in this scenario, the total amount of the material that will be purchased is the same, but you reduce the cost by buying all the required amount at once. And this is an example of value engineering. During this lecture, we've gone through the life cycle costing and value engineering concepts. During the next lecture, we'll go over estimate costs process. Estimate costs process. Estimate costs process is the second process of cost management knowledge area. Estimate costs is the process of developing an approximation of the monetary resources needed project activities. If you remember from time management knowledge area, activity duration of each project activity were estimated. And now in estimate costs process, cost of each activity is determined. After that, these estimations are used to bottom up all estimation values and create an overall project budget. Estimates for each project activity are done during estimate costs process. This is critical because you need to determine an overall project budget to complete the project. And if you estimate the costs for each project activity, this will increase accuracy and precision during cost estimation. Estimate costs process determines the amount of cost required to complete the project work. For instance, let's consider that you are managing a construction project, and one of the project activities is painting a room of the building. Let's assume that the painting will be completed in 1 day, and 2 painters will work. When estimating costs for this project activity, you need to consider the costs of the painters, such as wages, insurance policies, clothes, etc., and the material they will be using, such as brushes and dye, etc. Costs of other project activities are estimated, and a total project budget is determined at the end of this process. Costs are estimated for all resources that will be charged to the project. These costs include labor that will be paid to project resources, materials that will be used when performing that particular project activity, equipment that will be used, and any contingency reserves to accommodate delays or risks in that project activity. Estimating costs are similar to the estimating done in time management. Each activity is evaluated by the project resources, tools, materials, etc. that will be used in that activity are considered, and a cost estimation for each project activity is determined in the end. After cost estimation for each activity is completed, overall project budget can be determined respectively. Let's go through important points about estimating again. As you remember, we have gone through important points about estimating during our previous lecture in time management knowledge area. The list is similar, therefore we won't give a detailed explanation for each bullet again. Since these points are crucial, it is better to go over once again for the cost management. Cost estimation should be based on WBS to improve accuracy. Work breakdown structure of a project shows the hierarchy of project deliverables. Therefore, if estimation is done starting from the smallest part of work, it'll be easier to sum up the cost of each work package to find the total cost of the project through the help of WBS. Estimation of an activity should be done by the person doing the work, because he knows the details of the project activity, what he will be using as an equipment, an amount of material needed to complete the project activity. Therefore, estimation must be done by the assignee of the work. Historical information from past projects is key, because if your organization has done a similar project activity in past projects, it'll give a very good insight about the activity in the new project. For instance, if a 10-meter square room has been painted with a $200 cost in a past project, this will be a critical input for painting tasks of a new project as well. Cost baseline should be taken in the beginning and should not be changed except change requests. Because cost baseline of a project will show your initial project cost estimation for a project, and during the rest of the project, you need to meet these estimations to complete the project on budget. In order to measure cost performance of the project with the actual costs, you need to consider baseline values to check whether you are under budget or over budget. Therefore, as long as there is not a change request that will cause an increase in the project budget, cost baseline should not be changed in order to ensure healthy cost performance measurements. Changes should be requested when cost problems occur, because if the project is exceeding the agreed budget, you will need additional funding resources to fund the remaining activities of the project. Project manager may periodically recalculate the estimate to complete, which is abbreviated as ETC. Estimate to complete value shows the required budget to complete the remaining activities of the project, based on the cost performance of the project achieved till now. So, if the cost performance of the project was worse than the planned, your ETC will show that you need a higher budget to complete the remaining activities of the project respectively. And the vice versa is, if you completed the previous activities of the project with a smaller budget than the estimated, then you'll need a smaller budget to complete the remaining activities of the project. There is a process for creating the most accurate estimate, and this process must be followed for an accurate and attainable project budget. Project manager must meet any agreed upon estimates. So if the project budget has been determined as $1 million, project manager must complete the project with this budget, as long as there is not a new change request that will increase the budget necessity. Estimates can be decreased by reducing risks, because during estimation of each activity, a contingency reserve is planned if there is any risk associated with the activity. If these risks are eliminated or reduced, contingency reserves planned to accommodate the impacts of these risks will be reduced respectively, and this will help in reducing the estimates for the project activities. During estimation, cost of all work needed to complete the project is estimated. These costs include cost of quality efforts. Quality has a cost. You cannot produce a high-quality product with a small budget. Therefore, depending on the quality requirements of the project, your costs will differ. Cost of risk efforts. Negative risks may cause delays and extra costs to the project. For instance, let's consider that you're managing a construction project in an area which has high earthquake risk. In case of an earthquake, your construction will be affected, and you might need to fix hampered part of your construction after an earthquake. Therefore, risks of a project affect the contingency reserves to accommodate risks of the activities, and this affects the total project budget respectively. Cost of project manager's time. Depending on the project complexity, number of resources, and nature of the project manager will spend effort for the project, and this will bring a cost for the project as well. Cost of project management activities. Project management activities include planning, estimation, project meetings, etc. And these activities will need a certain amount of time in the project. Therefore, these activities will have a cost respectively. Costs directly associated with the project. Training, paper, pencils, etc. Depending on the project and industry, you will need materials to complete the project. For a construction project, you will need trucks, cement, steel, wood, etc. For a software project, you'll need development environment, testing equipment, PCs, etc. And these materials will bring a cost to the project as well. Cost of office expenses. In order to bring a project resources into a same place, you need to reserve a room in the company or rent an office outside. In either case, reserving a room as a project working space will be a project cost. Profit when applicable. Projects are done to provide a positive output for the company or for commercial purposes. For instance, a smartphone manufacturer produces a new version to sell to consumers to make profit. Overhead costs, such as management salaries, general office expenses, etc. CEO of a company does not work actively in a project, right? But he has a salary, so he has a cost to the company. Similarly, security guards of the company do not work on projects, but they are a cost to the company. These kinds of overhead costs of the companies are considered when calculating costs of each project. This does not mean that the cost of the CEO is placed into a particular project budget, but overhead costs of a company are considered with the all projects of a company, and when making calculations, these costs are considered in projects with a reflection of these overhead costs to the project. During this lecture, we've gone through estimate costs process. During the next lecture, we'll go over types of costs. Types of costs. There are 4 main types of costs in a project. We will go over each type of cost one by one during this lecture. The first type of cost is variable cost. Variable costs change with the amount of production or work. For instance, wages of the employees, cost of materials that will be used in the project are variable costs. Total wages you will be paying for the personnel will increase with the number of project resources, respectively. Similarly, the more material you use in a project, the more you will spend for the materials. The second type of cost is fixed costs. These costs do not change as production changes. For instance, setup cost of an equipment or rental cost of an office. In your project, you will need an office to gather your project team members in the same place. It doesn't matter whether there will be 5 team members or 10 team members, rental cost of the office is the same. The third type of cost is direct costs. Direct costs of the project are directly attributable to the work on a project. For instance, wages of the project resources, materials that will be used in the project are direct costs, because these will be input to the project in order to produce project deliverables. The fourth and the last type of cost is indirect costs. Overhead items or costs incurred for the benefit of more than one project are indirect costs. For instance, CEO of the company does not actively contribute to the projects of a company. However, his salary, compensation packages, etc. are all a cost to the company. Similarly, security guard of the building will not be working on the project, but his salary is a cost for the company. Therefore, when considering costs in project management, these costs are reflected to the direct costs of the project generally. This concept is more about finance, but generally speaking, corporate companies calculate the costs of company and reflects these costs per revenue-generating resource. For instance, cost of a software developer in a project will include the overhead costs of the company as well. During this lecture, we've gone through different types of costs in projects. During the next lecture, we'll be going over inputs to estimating costs. Inputs to estimating costs. During cost estimation, you will need several inputs in order to determine the overall project budget of the project. Scope baseline is one of the inputs. Scope of a project shows what will be delivered throughout the project. Therefore, it is directly related with the amount of work that will be delivered and affects the costs. Project schedule is an important input to the estimating costs because timing of something you buy affects its costs. For instance, for a construction project, costs of the materials might be increasing during summer since construction works are speeding during summer. Or if you're purchasing materials with a foreign currency, currency fluctuations over time might affect your costs. Since project schedule will show which activity will be started and completed when, it will be a critical input for estimating costs. Depending on the costs of the project, you need to develop a time-phased spending plan. Let's consider that your budget is $1 million. Since you will not be using this budget at the day one of the project, you need to create a time-phased spending plan. For instance, you need to come with a monthly spending plan. Human resource plan is a critical input for estimating costs as well. We will see human resource plan during human resource management in detail. Human resource plan of a project includes rewards, labor rates, qualifications, and quantity of resources. For instance, each project resource that will work throughout the project will be in the human resource plan, and their costs and qualifications will be listed in the human resource plan as well. Therefore, these costs will be determining project budget. Risk register is another input for estimating costs. We will go through risk register during risk management knowledge area. Risk register of a project includes risks of the project, their probability of occurrence, impact of risks when it occurred, and risk response strategies to overcome the impacts of risks when they occurred. Since risk register will include detailed information about risks, budget that needs to be allocated to overcome the impacts of risks are also included in the risk register of the project. Therefore, risks are input and output for estimate costs process. Apart from the impact of risks, there will be risk control costs. For instance, you will need periodic risk reviews, reevaluation, and monitoring risks throughout the project, and all these will bring cost to the project. Policies on estimating templates, processes, procedures, lessons learned, and historical information are also input to estimating costs. For instance, if there is a specific procedure or process to provide estimates for the project in a company, these must be considered during estimating costs. Company culture and existing systems about estimation must be used during estimating as well. For instance, if there is a specific tool or application that is used during estimation of project activities, these must be used during cost estimation. Some corporate companies have tools or applications that calculate the materials or resource costs based on provided inputs. These must be used as inputs during projects. Project management costs will be an aspect of the project budget as well. Project manager will spend time for creating and sending status reports, change analysis, managing project team, etc. And all these mean a cost for the project as well. During this lecture, we've gone through inputs to estimating costs. During the next lecture, we'll go over estimating. Estimating. What are the tools and techniques used in cost estimation? Tools and techniques used in estimate activity durations process can be used in estimate costs process as well. We will list the tools and techniques used in activity duration estimates here, but since we have gone through these techniques in detail during previous lectures, we won't go through these tools and techniques in detail. One-point estimate technique is one of the techniques used in cost estimation as well. Project activity details and information are provided to the assignee of the project, and the assignee provides a one-point estimate for the work. For instance, for the installation of a database in a software project, the resource that will perform the activity can tell that the cost of the activity will be $2,000. Similarly, other project activity costs will be estimated, and overall project budget will be determined in the end. Analogous estimating technique is used to compare a similar activity that was performed in a previous project. For instance, if a similar development task cost $1,500 in a previous project, this value can be considered when providing estimation for the similar activity in the new project. Parametric estimating technique calculates projected costs for an activity based on historical records from previous projects or other info. It is actually a mathematical approach to find the cost estimation of a project activity. Parameters that might affect the duration of a project activity are determined, and based on these parameters, project activity durations are estimated. For instance, for a construction project, you might get a parameter like construction of a 1 meter square area costs $2,000, and based on this parameter, overall construction project cost can be determined with the total space of the construction project. Three-point estimate was using three estimates for an activity: pessimistic, most likely, and optimistic estimates. Based on these estimates, an estimation of the activity is determined by taking an average of these three estimations. Weight of each estimate can depend on the approach that will be used in the three-point estimate technique. Triangular approach takes the average of three estimates, and beta distribution gives more weight to the most likely estimate in calculation. We will go through a new technique for cost estimating in this lecture. It is bottom-up estimating. In bottom-up estimating technique, detailed estimation is done for each activity or work package. Because project will be completed with the completion of these smaller pieces of work, estimating the cost of a smaller piece will ease the estimation process and improve accuracy as well. After each activity or work package cost is estimated, estimates are rolled up to control accounts. Several pieces of work and work packages constitute a control account, if you remember from our work breakdown structure lectures. Therefore, costs of each activity or work package will be summed up to find the total cost of a control account. The third and the last step in bottom-up estimating is costs of control accounts are rolled up to the overall project estimate. Because several control accounts in a WBS hierarchy will construct the overall project scope. When cost of control accounts are rolled up, total project cost will be found. Note that bottom-up estimating requires an accurate WBS, because the cost of each piece in the WBS is estimated first, and then these costs are rolled up to the higher level in the WBS to find the costs of a work package, control account, and the overall project respectively. This requires an accurate WBS for sure. During this lecture, we've gone through estimating. During the next lecture, we'll go through contributors to creation of estimates. Contributors to creation of estimates. We have seen how cost estimation is done in a project. During estimation, there are several contributors to the estimation process. We will list the most important contributors to the estimation process in this lecture. The first contributor is project management software. Depending on the industry, organization, and dynamics of the project, several project management software applications can be used during cost estimations. For instance, Microsoft Project is the most popular project management software used by the project managers around the world. PPM product of the HP is used in corporate organizations for project, program, and portfolio management. These software applications keep track of costs, ease calculation of overall project costs, and speed up calculations. Determining resource cost rates is another contributor to the estimation process. For instance, what is the man-hour rate of a subject matter expert? What is the monthly cost of a software developer who will be working on our project? These are important factors that will affect your cost calculations, because depending on the amount of work they will provide to the project, respective cost will be accrued to the project. Reserve analysis is another contributor to the estimation process. Reserves are planned to accommodate unanticipated costs and risks in a project. If there are risks for an activity in the project, depending on the probability and impact of the project, reserves must be planned accordingly. For instance, if there is a risk of 2 days delay for a certain project activity in the project, additional costs that will be caused by this delay must be planned as reserve and included in the cost estimation, respectively. And the last important contributor to the estimation process is cost of quality. Each project will have quality requirements as well. Depending on the quality requirements of a project, cost of activities will differ respectively. For a higher level of quality, it is expected that a higher amount of budget will be needed to meet those quality requirements respectively. Therefore, quality requirements of the project will be a critical aspect affecting project costs. During this lecture, we've gone through the contributors to creation of estimates. During the next lecture, we'll go over accuracy of estimates. Accuracy of estimates. Accuracy of estimates is a critical issue in project management, because after cost estimation is complete, necessary budget to run the project must be aligned by the management, and this budget will be used to complete the project work throughout the project. If actual costs of the activities exceed the planned budget, you, as a project manager, might need to find additional source of funds to complete the remaining activities of the project. Estimates in the early phases of a project are less accurate than those made later in the project, because in the beginning of the project, you do not know that much about the future of the project, and risks are at the highest level. Therefore, uncertainties and ambiguities might cause higher deviances in future respectively. However, as the project progresses, you will have the actual results of the project, and you will get a better level of know-how about the project. Uncertainties and ambiguities will be cleared out in the meantime, and this will ensure more accurate estimation respectively. Estimates must be in a range in a project. For instance, for a screen development activity in a software project, duration estimate can be as 5 days plus or minus 1 day. This means this activity can be completed in 4 to 6 days. Similarly, cost estimation must be in a range as well. Cost estimation for this activity can be $4,000 plus or minus 10%. This means the activity will cost somewhere around $3,600 to $4,400. And these ranges are wider in the beginning of the project and will narrow as more information is determined during the project. Estimator gives these estimations in a range because he does not have all the information available in the beginning to make an accurate estimate for an activity. As time passes, activities are completed, unclear issues are cleared out, risks are eliminated, or probability of occurrence decreases. All these factors help to narrow the estimate ranges respectively. Typically, there are 3 types of activity estimation ranges. We will go over these 3 types of estimates one by one. The first one is rough order of magnitude estimate, which is abbreviated as ROM. Rough order of magnitude estimate is used during the initiating phase of a project when there is less information about the project, when there are a high number of risks, ambiguities, and uncertainties. Rough order of magnitude estimate provides an estimation in the range of -25 to +75% from actual values. For instance, if an activity will cost $100, rough order of magnitude estimate gives a range from $75 to $175 respectively. The second type of estimation range is budget estimate. Budget estimate is usually used during the planning phase of a project. Budget estimates of an activity are in the range of -10 to +25% from actual values. For instance, if an activity will cost $100, budget estimate gives a range from $90 to $125 respectively. The third and the last type of estimation range is definitive estimate. Definitive estimates are used later during the project, when things are clearer and when there is more information available about the activities. Definitive estimates of an activity are in the range of -10 to +10% or -5 to +10% from actual values. For instance, if an activity will cost $100, definitive estimate gives a range from $90 to $110 respectively. These ranges are used during the project depending on the information available for an activity. Result of estimate cost process is having activity cost estimates and basis for those estimates. So the main result, main output of the estimate cost process is you will have the costs associated for each specific activity. And with these cost estimates of each activity, when they are rolled up, you will reach the total cost of the project respectively. During this lecture, we've seen the accuracy of estimates. During the next lecture, we will describe the next process of cost management, determine budget process. Determine budget process. The third process of the cost management knowledge area is determine budget process. Determine budget process is the process of aggregating the estimated costs of individual activities or work packages to establish an authorized cost baseline. During estimate costs process, cost estimations of project activities and work packages are determined. With these estimates, overall project cost is found by rolling up the costs of project activities and work packages to control accounts, and this is done during determine budget process. Once the cost of activities and overall project cost is determined, a baseline is taken. Therefore, determine budget process determines the cost baseline. Cost baseline of a project shows the planned cost of each activity and work package in a project. Cost baseline is an important input during monitoring and controlling, because actual costs of the project will be compared against planned costs to measure the cost performance of the project. Project budget refers to the total cost of the project. You might be hearing project budget and project cost frequently. These actually refer to the same thing, and represents the total amount of money that needs to be spent on project activities to complete and deliver the agreed project scope. In other words, budget defines how much money the company should have available to complete the project. Based on the determined project budgets, organizations or companies align required amount of money to fund projects. Project estimate cannot be completed without risk management activities and inclusion of reserves, because when providing cost estimate of an activity, risks associated with the activity are considered, and money that will be spent to overcome the impacts of risk when it occurred are planned in the project budget respectively. These costs planned to overcome the risks are called reserves. There are two types of reserves. The first one is contingency reserves. Contingency reserves are used to address the cost impacts of remaining risks. For instance, let's consider that you're managing a construction project. Cost of the construction of the main frame of the building is $1 million. However, due to bad weather conditions, workers might not progress as planned, and this can cause an additional $100,000 to this activity. In this example, $100,000 is the contingency risk for the bad weather conditions risk. The second type of reserves is management reserves. Management reserves address the cost of any unforeseen risks. Although you followed the project management processes properly and listed the possible risks that might affect the project, there might be unforeseen risks during the project. For instance, a regulatory impact, a strike in the company, natural disaster, etc. For these kind of unforeseen risks or changes, management team of the company plans an additional budget on top of the project cost. For instance, if the project budget is $10 million for a construction project, management team of the company might plan a 5% management reserve for this project. This means they reserve additional $500,000 budget for any unforeseen risks that might occur in the project. The main difference between the contingency and management reserves is contingency reserves are planned for identified risks, while management reserves are for unforeseen risks. And another difference is contingency reserves are included in the project activity cost estimates, while management reserves are put on top of the project's total cost. During this lecture, we've seen the determine budget process. During the next lecture, we'll be going over determine budget process example. Determine budget process example. We've seen the determine budget process in our previous lecture. During this lecture, we'll go through an example. During estimate costs process, cost estimations of each project activity and work package are determined. This is an example work breakdown structure and costs associated with each activity, work package and control account respectively. As you see, activity estimates are at the bottom of the WBS. Cost of Activity 1 and Activity 2 are $25,000. Cost of Activity 3 is $50,000, and cost of Activity 4 is $45,000. These cost estimates of activities are rolled up to find the cost of estimates of work packages. As you see, work package number 1 consists of Activity 1, Activity 2, and Activity 3. Therefore, cost of work package number 1 is the total cost of the activities belonging to it. Similarly, costs of the other work packages are found by rolling up the cost of the activities belonging to the regarding work package. Work packages are grouped under control accounts. Costs of work packages will determine the total cost of control account respectively. For instance, for control account number 1. There are 3 work packages under this control account, and total cost of these work packages is $850,000, which is the total cost of control account number 1. Overall project estimate is found by aggregating the costs of control accounts in a project respectively. In this example, total project estimate is $1,250,000. However, this cost does not include the cost reserved for risks. Therefore, contingency reserves must be added on top of project estimates to find the total cost baseline. In this example, contingency reserves for the identified risks in the project is $105,000. And when this is added on top of the project estimates, cost baseline is found at $1,355,000. Cost baseline is under the management of project team, and this is the planned amount of money that will be spent to complete the agreed project scope. However, there can be unforeseen risks in the project. Management reserves are planned by the organization or company management on top of the cost baseline. These reserves are used in case of any unplanned or unforeseen risks occur. For this example, management reserves are $68,000 for unforeseen risks. This amount is added on top of cost baseline. An overall cost budget is found at $1,423,000. This means in order to execute and complete this project successfully, the company or organization must spare $1,423,000 funds for this project. During this lecture, we've gone through a determine budget process example. During the next lecture, we'll go over cost baseline and budget components. Cost baseline and project budget components. Cost baseline of a project represents funds authorized for project manager to manage and control. Project activities are determined, and then cost estimations for each activity are completed. Estimated costs are aggregated to find the total cost of the project. Contingency reserves to accommodate risks of the project when they occur also planned in the cost. After overall costs are determined, this will be the cost baseline of the project. Let's assume that cost baseline of a project has been determined as $1 million. This will include contingency reserves to minimize the impact of risks when they occurred. Project manager will be using this budget to manage the project activities and complete the project successfully. On the other hand, management team of the company or organization will put reserves for the project as well. As we mentioned in the previous lectures, this is called as management reserves, and this is not in direct control of the project manager. Management evaluates projects in the organization and determines a reserve for the project for unanticipated costs that may arise during the project. Cost baseline under the control of the project manager and management reserve put by the management of the company together constitute the total cost budget for a project. In other words, cost budget is the total amount of money that a company allocated for a project. Let's have a look at the details of cost budget components. This figure shows how project budget is constituted clearly. Note that cost budget is also referred as project budget. As we've seen in a previous slide, cost baseline and management reserve together constitutes the project budget. Cost baseline is constituted with the costs of control accounts. If you remember the work breakdown structure, we were aggregating the costs of each control account to find the cost baseline. Control accounts have work packages and estimates of the work packages, with their contingency reserves, bring us the cost of control accounts. The lowest level of a work breakdown structure is activities. Cost estimates of activities and their contingency reserves will constitute the cost of work packages. It is better to summarize here again. Order of project budget estimation is as in the following 5 steps. First step, estimate activity costs and contingency reserves. Second step, aggregate activity cost estimates and contingency reserves to find work package costs. Third step, aggregate work package costs and contingency reserves to find control account costs. Fourth step, aggregate control account costs to find cost baseline, and this will be the total amount of money that will be managed by the project manager to complete the project activities. And the fifth step, determine management reserve, which is estimated by the management of the company, and add on top of cost baseline to finalize the project budget or cost budget. During this lecture, we've seen the cost baseline and project budget components. We'll be going through what to do after determined budget in our next lecture. What to do after determined budget. Project team members completed their activity estimations, and then costs of activities, work packages, and control accounts have been aggregated. Project budget is now determined. What's next? After cost baseline and cost budget are determined, estimators will make sanity check for their estimates, because during cost estimations, each activity is assessed and evaluated by project team members. Once the overall project budget is determined, this needs to be rechecked by the estimators. Because the total cost of work packages or control accounts in the work breakdown structure might give different insights to the estimators to revise their estimations. Then, cash flows are defined to make sure that funding will be available when you need in your project. For instance, consider that you determined the project budget as $1 million. However, the company or organization you work for will not give this total amount of money you'll be spending at day one of your project. Therefore, a spending plan must exist, and cash flow in and out of the project must be present. For instance, you should be able to state that $40,000 will be spent in the first month, $100,000 will be spent in the second month, and $50,000 will be received from sales at the end of the second month, etc. This kind of cash flow will help your company's or organization's finance team to be prepared to provide necessary funds to your project. Check constraints about the cost in project charter. If you remember from our previous lectures, constraints of a project were listed in project charter. For instance, if the sponsor can spare only $1 million for this project, this is a budget constraint and needs to be checked after you determine the budget of your project. This figure shows the cost baseline, expenditures, and funding requirements in a project. Let's go through this figure to understand how project costs will be changing throughout the project. As you see, the cost baseline is the middle curve in this figure, and expenditures are the dotted line lying under the cost baseline. So this figure shows that expenditures are below the planned cost baseline until a time during the project. At some level later in the project, it exceeds the cost baseline. And if you look to the funding requirements, we see a staircase model, and this shows that funding will be provided for the project step by step. So each increase in this dotted funding requirements staircase line represents a new cash flow into your project. The top of the figure shows the management reserve. Right end of the figure shows that expenditures will exceed the budget at completion value, which is actually the initially determined project budget. Therefore, the management reserve will be used in this project. During this lecture, we've gone through what needs to be done after determined budget process. During the next lecture, we'll be going over control costs process. Control costs process. Control costs is the last process of cost management knowledge area. We will go through the details of this process and see the earned value management topic, which is a very important concept that is widely used in cost management of projects. Control costs is the process of monitoring the status of the project to update the project costs and managing changes to the cost baseline. After the determined project budget process, you will have a cost baseline, and this will show the total amount of money you'll be spending to complete the project. During the project, you'll be spending money for the materials that will be purchased, costs of employees, equipment that will be used, etc. While you are spending money, you need to monitor progressively that you'll be able to complete the project with the determined project budget, and this is done in control costs process. Control costs process provides the means to recognize variance from the plan, because you will be monitoring the expenditures you will be doing throughout the project, and you have the cost baseline of your project in hand as well. Let's assume that in the second month of your project, you've spent $220,000, although you have planned to spend $180,000. So you exceeded $40,000 according to the cost baseline. You need to assess this variance and take corrective actions to prevent any future variances, respectively. Any changes to the project should be prevented, since changes will bring extra cost to the project. One of the main responsibilities of the project manager is preventing unnecessary changes in a project. We've seen this in our previous lectures. If there are lots of change requests popping up in a project, you need to find the root causes of these changes and prevent them as soon as possible. Each change will bring additional activities to your project or rework, and this means additional cost respectively. During this lecture, we've gone through control costs process. During the next lecture, we'll be going over progress reporting. Progress reporting. Progress reporting is a critical activity that every project manager does throughout the project. You need to inform relevant stakeholders about the progress of your project. Project progress is used to check whether the project is on track. And when you check your project progress, if there are things going wrong, for example, if your project is behind schedule or over budget, you have to take corrective action in order to get back on track in your project. If the schedule is behind or over budget, you need to take corrective actions to get back on track, and this needs to be reported to the project stakeholders appropriately. Otherwise, stakeholders might panic whether the project will be accomplished successfully. There are tools and techniques used for checking project progress in projects, and earned value management is one of the most common techniques used for progress tracking. We'll be going over the details of the terms used in earned value management in our following lectures. We will go through sample scenarios and calculating the cost performance of the projects as well. The fundamental point of progress reporting in a project is determining how much % of a task is completed. How much % of the work is accomplished is determined by asking the % complete to the performer of the activity in projects. For example, during your project progress check, in order to determine the overall completion of the project percentage, you have to ask each resource of your project at what % he or she is in his or her task, because this % complete of each task constitutes the overall % complete of the project. And this is generally done by asking to each resource of a project at what % he or she is in his specific task or specific time. Tracking or task tracking tools may be used to collect this info from project resources. Let's assume that you are the project manager of a software project, and a software developer is working on a task which was estimated as 10 days. In the 5th day, if you go and ask him at what % he is on his task, and if he says that I'm at 40%, then you should consider that this activity is a little behind the schedule, since he might have completed the 50% since it's in the middle of the estimated duration. Or, if he says I'm at 60% of the task on the 5th day, then you might say that, okay, he's a little bit ahead than the planned. These kind of progress checks are generally done by asking the % complete of each activity to the performer of the activity in projects. This method may be easier to manage in smaller project teams. You can check with each project team member about the status of his tasks. However, let's assume that there are hundreds of project team members in a project. It'll be insane to check the % completion of each task with the project team members, and it will be unhealthy though. If % complete cannot be guessed by performers, following approaches can be applied. There are 3 approaches for % completion rates of activities in a project. The first one is the 50-50 rule. In this approach, an activity is considered 50% complete when it begins and 50% credit for when it's finished. So in this approach, when an activity is started, by default, it's marked as 50% complete, and when it's finished, it's marked as 100% complete. In the second approach, the 20-80 rule, an activity is considered 20% complete when it begins and 80% credit for when it's finished. So if you're using this approach, when an activity is started, you mark it as 20% complete, and once it's finished, you mark it as 100% complete. And the last approach is 0-100 rule. In this approach, an activity is considered 100% complete when it finishes. So in this approach, you do not mark any percent complete for an activity when it's started, so it is still 0%. You mark an activity as 100% complete only when it's completed. Note that these approaches are easier to apply and collect in projects. However, task durations must be shorter respectively. Otherwise, consider a task duration of 20 days. If you consider it as 100% complete or 50% complete on the first day, this might lead to unhealthy progress calculations if you consider lots of other tasks in the project. During this lecture, we've seen the progress reporting. During the next lecture, we'll be going through earned value management. Earned value management. Earned value management, abbreviated as EVM, is a very important concept to measure the performance of a project. It is widely used in many industries. Earned value management is very important for project management world as well. Earned value management is used to measure project performance against scope, schedule, and cost baselines. Scope, cost, and schedule are critical aspects of a project. Therefore, earned value management plays a vital role in measuring performance of projects. Earned value management is constituted around three fundamental terms. These are planned value, abbreviated as PV, earned value, abbreviated as EV, and actual cost, abbreviated as AC. Now let's see these three terms in detail one by one. Planned value is the estimated value for the work planned. Let's assume that during estimation, an activity has been estimated as 10 days of work effort and $10,000 cost. These are actually planned values for this activity. Planned value for the schedule is 10 days, and planned value for the cost is $10,000. Earned value is the estimated value of the work actually accomplished. Let's consider the previous activity. 10 days of work and $10,000 of cost were planned values. During project execution, these planned values will not be as planned. For instance, this activity might be completed in 9 days and with a cost of $11,000. In this case, although you completed the work in 9 days, its earned value is 10 days from schedule perspective. And from the cost perspective, although you spent $11,000, it was planned as a $10,000 valued activity. Therefore, your earned value will be $10,000 from cost perspective. And the last term we'll be seeing here is actual cost. Actual cost is whatever it would take or cost about an activity during project execution. For instance, we have told that activity has been completed in 9 days and cost $11,000 in our previous case. These are actual values for this activity. Actual cost from schedule perspective is 9 days, and actual cost from the cost perspective is $11,000. We have seen the foundations of earned value management in this lecture. During the next lecture, we'll go through an example scenario and make earned value calculations respectively. Earned value management exercise. Let's go through an earned value management exercise to understand this concept better. Here is our example scenario. You started a house renovation project. You plan to spend $100,000 in total for the project and to finish the project in 100 days. Today is the 20th day after starting to the project. Based on your plans, you should have spent $20,000 and completed 20% of the total work in the 20th day of your project. But you spent $17,000 and completed 18% of the total work. What are the planned value, earned value, and actual cost for this scenario? Let's see them one by one. Now, let's look at the planned value of this example scenario. You should have spent $20,000 and completed 20% of the total work in the 20th day of your project. This was your initial plan. Therefore, your planned value is 20 days from schedule perspective, which is formed by 20% multiplied by 100 days or time-related calculations. And your planned value is $20,000 for cost-related calculations, because you have planned that you should have spent $100,000. Therefore, your planned value is $20,000 from cost perspective for this scenario. What is the earned value for this scenario? You spent $17,000 and completed 18% of the total work, so earned value is 18 days from schedule perspective, because you have completed 18% of the overall 100 days of total project work, and it gives us an earned value of 18 days for time-related calculations. Earned value is $18,000 for cost-related calculations, because similarly, 18% of the total work has been completed, and since our total work was at $100,000 cost, 18% of it makes $18,000 as earned value. And now we will look to the actual cost of the project. Today is the 20th day after starting to the project, but you spent $17,000. So the actual cost is 20 days from schedule perspective, because we're at the 20th day of the project, and actual cost is $17,000 for cost-related calculations, because we've actually spent $17,000 in this project. During this lecture, we've gone through an example of earned value management scenario. During the next lecture, we'll go through variances in earned value management concept. Variances in earned value management. Variants in project management are critical indicators to find out whether a project is on budget and on track in terms of schedule. Schedule and cost performance of the project is measured, and variances are determined accordingly. Based on the extent of variances, appropriate actions must be taken to get back on track if the project is behind schedule. Similarly, if the project is over budget, necessary actions must be taken to either find necessary funds or future activities must be reconsidered to not exceed the planned budget. Now, let's go over the variance terms that help us to find out whether a project is ongoing healthy. The first term is schedule variance. Schedule variance is abbreviated as SV. Schedule variance is the measure of schedule performance. It is calculated by subtracting the planned value from the earned value. Let's consider that an activity was planned as 10 days during planning. If this activity is completed in less than 10 days during project execution, it will be ahead of schedule. If it is completed in more than 10 days during project execution, since it will take more than the planned time, it will be behind schedule, because earned value of this activity will be 10 days. So briefly, if schedule variance is less than 0, then the project is behind schedule. If schedule variance is equal to 0, then the project is on track as planned, because activities are completed in their planned duration. And if the schedule variance is greater than 0, then the project is ahead of schedule, because you're completing the activities earlier than their planned values. In summary, the greater the schedule variance is, the better the project schedule performance you have. Let's see the cost variance now. Cost variance is abbreviated as CV. Cost variance is the amount of budget deficit or surplus. Briefly, it shows whether a project is under budget or over budget. Cost variance of a project or activity is calculated by subtracting the actual cost from the earned value. Let's assume that an activity has an earned value of $10,000. During project execution, if this activity will cost more than $10,000, it will be over budget. And if it is completed for less than $10,000, the activity will be under budget. So briefly, if cost variance is less than 0, then the project is over budget. If cost variance is equal to 0, then the project is on budget as planned. If cost variance is greater than 0, then the project is under budget. In summary, the greater the cost variance is, the better project cost performance you have. Now, let's see Schedule Performance Index. Schedule Performance Index is abbreviated as SPI. Schedule Performance Index is the measure of schedule efficiency. Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, is calculated by dividing the earned value of an activity or project to its planned value. This means if earned value is greater than the planned value, Schedule Performance Index will be over 1. Let's assume that a project activity was planned as 10 days. If this activity is completed in less than 10 days, SPI will be over 1. And if it is completed in more than 10 days, its SPI will be less than 1. So briefly, if Schedule Performance Index is less than 1, then the project is behind schedule. If Schedule Performance Index is 1, then the project is on track. And if Schedule Performance Index is greater than 1, then the project is ahead of schedule. In summary, the greater the Schedule Performance Index is, the better project schedule performance you have. Now, let's go over the last variance term we'll be seeing in this lecture, Cost Performance Index. Cost Performance Index is abbreviated as CPI. Cost Performance Index is actually the measure of cost efficiency of the project. Cost Performance Index, or CPI, is calculated by dividing the earned value of the project or activity to the actual cost. This means if the earned value of an activity or project is greater than the actual spent amount for that activity, CPI of the project will be greater. So briefly, if Cost Performance Index is less than 1, then the project is over budget. If Cost Performance Index is 1, then the project is on budget as planned. If Cost Performance Index is greater than 1, then the project is under budget. In summary, the greater the Cost Performance Index is, the better project cost performance you have. During this lecture, we've gone through the variance terms in earned value management, how to calculate variances, and how these variances are interpreted respectively. We'll be going over an exercise to understand variance calculations in projects. Variances in earned value management. Exercise. We have seen the formula of variances and how variances are interpreted in the previous lecture. Now we will calculate the variances of our sample project scenario we've seen in previous lectures. Let's calculate the schedule variance of the previous scenario. 18% of the work was complete in the 20th day of the project, so earned value was 18 days. And planned value for the 20th day was 20 days of work should have been completed. Therefore, schedule variance of the project is found by subtracting 20 days of planned value from the 18 days of earned value, The result is -2 days. Schedule variance is less than 0. Therefore, we conclude that the project is behind the schedule. Let's calculate the cost variance now. 18% of the work has been completed, and this was valued as $18,000 in the 20th day of the project. And for this, $17,000 has been spent. So earned value was $18,000 and actual cost was $17,000 for the project. If we substitute these values in the cost variance formula, we will find the cost variance as $1,000. Cost variance is greater than 0, therefore project is under the budget. We will calculate the schedule performance index now. Earned value was 18 days and planned value was 20 days. If we divide the earned value to the planned value, we'll conclude that SPI is 0.9. Schedule performance index of the project is less than 1. Therefore, project is behind the schedule. This is actually the same conclusion when we interpreted the schedule variance results. If we substitute the earned value and actual values in the cost performance index formula, cost performance index is found as 1.06. Cost performance of the project is greater than 1. Therefore, project is under budget. In other terms, you're spending less than what you planned, which is good. This is actually the same conclusion when we interpreted the cost variance results. During this lecture, we've gone through our sample project scenario and calculated the variances of the project. Then we interpreted the results. We'll be going over forecasting and earned value management in our next lecture. Forecasting in earned value management. One of the critical aspects of project management is forecasting. You need to check always whether the remaining funds will be sufficient to complete the remaining activities in the project. If there is a huge variance, then you need to take corrective actions to fix the variance. Otherwise, you will be short of funds in future, and this will cause the project failure. We will be going over forecasting terms used in earned value management during this lecture, and show the formulas about how to calculate those terms for a project. The first term is budget at completion. Budget at completion is abbreviated as BAC. Budget at completion value shows the total project budget that is planned to be spent throughout the project. We've seen in our previous lectures how to determine the project budget. Budget at completion is actually the output of that process. Estimate at completion is abbreviated as EAC. Estimate at completion value of a project shows the total cost of completing all work, and it includes the sum of all actual costs to date and the estimate to complete. Let's assume that you determine the project budget as $1 million during planning. When you accomplish the 20% of the work, you know more about the details of the project, and based on the tasks that have been performed, you might conclude that the remaining activities of the project can be costlier or less costly. So, estimate at completion value might be more or less than the budget at completion value, depending on the performance of the project. Estimate at completion is a critical term, because if you plan to complete the project with a $1 million budget, and if your new estimate at completion value shows that it'll take $1.1 million, you need to be prepared to find an additional $100,000 budget to complete the project. Let's see the formula for estimate at completion now. Estimate at completion is found by aggregating the actual cost occurred till now in the project and bottom-up estimate to complete value. Bottom-up ETC is actually a forecast about how much the remaining activities in the project will cost. Bottom-up ETC value can be found by estimating the work remaining to be completed. You can get the new estimation of project resources for the remaining activities in the project, and they can revise their previous estimations based on their experience in the project, and this will give more realistic and up-to-date estimate at completion value respectively. Estimate at completion value can be found by the existing project performance values as well. In this way, you won't need to ask each project team member to revise his estimate, because if you go back to re-estimation frequently during the project, you'll be spending a significant amount of time for replanning instead of performing the project work. Therefore, generally, existing project performance values are used to calculate estimate at completion value. Their project performance values are used to calculate estimate at completion. These are earned value, schedule performance index, and cost performance index. Let's go over 3 approaches for calculating estimate at completion one by one now. In the first approach, all future remaining work in the project are assumed that they will cost as they planned in the beginning, and cost of these remaining work is found by subtracting the earned value achieved till now from the budget at completion value. This is summed up with the actual cost to find the total estimate at completion value. In summary, estimate at completion is the sum of budget at completion minus earned value and actual cost occurred till now. The second approach of estimate at completion calculation assumes that the cost performance achieved till now is expected to continue in the future. In other words, let's assume that you spend 20% more than what you planned till now. This approach assumes that you'll be spending 20% more from the planned value for the remaining activities in the project as well. Therefore, formula uses the cost performance index to estimate at completion value. Estimate at completion is found by dividing the budget at completion value to cost performance index achieved till now. This assumes that cost performance index achieved till now will be persistent till the end of the project. The third approach of estimate at completion calculation assumes that estimate to complete work will be performed at an efficiency rate that considers both the cost and schedule performance indices. Formula for the third approach is as you see in this slide. Actual cost is summed up with the estimate to complete value, which is calculated by using budget at completion, earned value, CPI, and SPI. Actually, budget at completion value minus earned value gives the total remaining work as planned in the beginning of the project. By dividing this to the multiplication of CPI and SPI, cost and schedule performance of the project is taken into account. The better the cost and schedule performance are, the less estimate to complete effort will come out of this equation. Estimate to complete value is abbreviated as ETC, and it is the expected cost to finish all the remaining project work. We have seen in previous slides that different approaches can be used to calculate estimate to complete value. Common formula for estimate to complete is estimate to complete equals to estimate at completion minus earned value. By this way, completed work's earned value is subtracted from the new estimated project completion budget, calculated based on the performance of accomplished tasks. And this result gives us estimate to complete value for the remaining activities in the project. Estimate to complete work can be re-estimated as well. At a certain point in the project, you can work with the project team members to revise their estimations for the remaining activities in the project. This will give the cost of remaining work in the project as well. Variance at completion is another term used in forecasting in earned value management. Variance at completion is abbreviated as VAC, and it is the amount of budget deficit or surplus expressed as the difference between BAC and EAC. Variance at completion is found by subtracting the estimate at completion value from the budget at completion value. This variance will show you how much you will exceed your planned budget or how much you will complete the project under the budget. If VAC is less than 0, project will be completed over the planned budget. If VAC is 0, project will be completed on the planned budget. and if VAC is greater than 0, the project will be completed under the planned budget. The last term we will be seeing in this lecture is To Complete Performance Index. To Complete Performance Index is abbreviated as TCPI. TCPI is a measure of the cost performance that is required to be achieved in order to meet budget. In other words, TCPI shows how likely to complete a project on budget at completion value or estimate at completion value. TCPI is calculated in two ways. First way is checking whether completing the project at BAC value will be achievable. This is found by subtracting the earned value from the budget at completion value, and then dividing this to the result of budget at completion value minus actual cost. If you look at the denominator, it gives us the cost remaining work, because it is the result of cost of all of the overall project minus accomplished work's earned value. If you look at the denominator, it gives us the remaining budget after your expenditures, because it is the result of project budget minus actual cost. With these insights, if you spend more than the earned value of the completed activities in a project, TCPI will be moving over 1, and TCPI will go below 1 if earned value of the project is greater than the actual cost. Note that this formula can be applied when budget at completion is still valid. However, things might change during the project, and achieving budget at completion value might not be possible. In this case, a new estimate at completion value is calculated, and project team aims to complete the project on a new estimated budget. TCPI formula slightly changes when BAC value is no longer viable in a project. Instead of budget at completion value in the denominator, estimate at completion value is placed. The interpretation is similar in both of the TCPI calculations. If TCPI is less than 1, then it is easier to complete the project in BAC or EAC value. If TCPI equals to 1, you will complete the project on planned BAC or EAC. And if TCPI is greater than 1, then it's harder to complete the project in BAC or EAC value. During this lecture, we've gone through forecasting in earned value management. During the next lecture, we'll be going over an example to understand forecasting in earned value management better. Forecasting in earned value management exercise. We have seen the terms used in forecasting in earned value management in our previous lecture. During this lecture, we'll be going over our project scenario example we've gone through before and calculate each forecasting value one by one. Budget at completion value is actually the planned budget to spend to complete the project activities. Since the scenario was telling that $100,000 was planned, budget at completion value is $100,000 respectively. Let's calculate the estimate at completion value now. There were 3 approaches to calculate estimate at completion value. We'll be going over each approach and calculate EAC values one by one. In the first approach, actual cost was aggregated with the result of budget at completion minus earned value result. If we substitute the values of the scenario in the formula, we'll be finding the estimate at completion will be $99,000 with this approach. As you see, since earned value of the completed work is more than the spent cost, estimate at completion value is less than the budget at completion value. In the second approach, estimate at completion was calculated by dividing the budget at completion value to the cost performance index. When we substitute the BAC and CPI values in the formula, estimate at completion is found as $94,340 with the second approach. Since the current cost performance of the project is good, this performance is assumed to be achieved during the rest of the project. Thus, the estimate at completion value is lower than the one we calculated with the first approach. In the third approach, Cost performance and schedule performance of the project is taken into account. When we substitute the project values in the formula, the result is $102,954. As you see, estimate at completion value with this approach is greater than the budget at completion value, because, although the cost performance of the project was good, schedule performance of the project was bad. And when the cost and schedule performance of the project is considered together to find the estimate at completion value, result is greater than the budget at completion value. Now we will calculate the estimate to complete value. Estimate to complete is found by subtracting the earned value from estimate at completion value. When we substituted these values in the formula, the result is $84,954. This means with the new estimate at completion value, you'll be spending $84,954 for the remaining activities of the project according to forecasts. Note that we use the estimate at completion value we found by the third approach in this case. Depending on the estimate at completion value you'll be using, estimate at completion will vary as well. Variance at completion is found by subtracting the estimate at completion value from the budget at completion value. When we substituted these values in the formula, we found the result as minus $2,954. As you see, project is going over budget according to forecasts. However, if we have used the estimate at completion values we found with the first or second approach, VAC will be greater than 0, and indicating that the project will be completed under budget. Let's calculate the TCPI now. First, we'll calculate the TCPI based on BAC. When we substituted values in the formula, the result is 0.988. TCPI is less than 1. Therefore, we can conclude that it will be easier to complete the project on planned budget at completion value. This is actually the result of completing works that brought higher earned value than their costs. When we use the second approach of TCPI, we will be placing EAC on the denominator instead of BAC. In this case, we put the EAC we found by the third approach, and the result is 0.954. Since the new EAC value is greater than the BAC, TCPI value we found in this approach is less than the one we found with the first approach. Thus, it will be easier to complete the project at the new EAC value than to complete the project at BAC value. We've seen the calculation of forecasting values in earned value management for our project scenario. During the next lecture, we'll be going over important notes about earned value management. Important notes about EVM. We've seen the forecasting terms and a sample scenario that we calculated forecasting terms during the previous lectures. We'll be going over important points about earned value management during this lecture. First, we will go through the important notes for earned value management formulas. These notes will help you to understand and interpret earned value management values better. Earned value comes first in formulas. For instance, in variance formulas, earned value comes first, then planned value, actual value, etc. comes after the earned value. If it is an index formula, earned value will be in nominator of the formula. For instance, earned value over actual cost gives us the cost performance index. If formula is related about calculating cost forecast, then you should use actual cost. If formula is related about calculating schedule forecast, then you should use planned value. If you are interpreting a variance formula result, negative variance is an indication of bad performance, and positive variance is an indication of good performance. If you are interpreting an index formula result, if it is greater than 1, it is an indication of good performance. This is valid except TCPI. For TCPI, results less than 1 are indication of good performance. If you are interpreting an index formula result, if it is less than 1, it is an indication of bad performance. For instance, CPI less than 1 means project is over budget, and SPI less than 1 means project is behind schedule. This is valid except TCPI. For TCPI, results greater than 1 are an indication of bad performance, and shows that it will be less likely to complete the project on budget at completion or estimate at completion value. Now, let's see the earned value data for a project over budget and behind schedule on this graph. As you see on the graph, planned value line shows the planned project expenditures over time. Vertical line shows the current time. Earned value line is below the planned value line, so this project is spending more than what it brings as earned value. And respectively, actual cost line is above the planned value. In summary, for the moment, the project is over budget and spending more than what is planned. And based on forecasts, estimate to completion line drives to a higher value than budget at completion, so estimate at completion will be greater than the budget at completion. Most probably, management reserve put for this project will be spent for this project to accommodate the exceeding planned budget amount. Earned value is an effective tool for measuring performance and determining the needs to request changes. For instance, you might be behind schedule or over budget compared to the initial plans. And in this case, you need to take corrective actions to get back on track on the project. Otherwise, your project will miss the deadlines, and you'll be spending more than the planned budget. This will cause project failures. Control costs process comes into play at this stage. Based on the results of control costs process, if there is a negative variance in the project, corrective and preventive actions must be taken to get back on schedule and on budget. For instance, if the project is behind schedule, fast-tracking or crashing can be evaluated to shorten the duration of remaining activities in the project. If the project is over budget, cost of remaining activities can be reconsidered whether any saving would be possible. Or additional sources of funds must be found to feed the project financially. During this lecture, we've gone through important notes about earned value management. During the next lecture, we'll be going over questions and answers session. Questions and answers session. Question 1. Estimate at completion, or EAC, is a periodic evaluation of A. The cost of work completed, B. The value of work performed, C. The anticipated total cost at project completion, or D. What it will cost to finish the job. The answer is C. After determined budget project, overall project budget is determined. However, based on actual results of the project, cost of remaining activities are forecasted, and the estimate at completion value shows the anticipated total cost at project completion based on the actual performance of the project. Question 2. The main focus of life cycle costing is to A. Estimate installation costs, B. Estimate the cost of operations and maintenance, C. Consider installation costs when planning the project costs, or D. Consider operations and maintenance costs in making project decisions. The answer is D. If you remember, lifecycle costing was saying that from making a decision over different alternatives, do not think only the cost that will occur in the project. Think overall cost of a product or item when you are making a decision. Therefore, you have to take operations and maintenance cost into account when making a decision about the product during procurement. Question 3. A rough order of magnitude, or ROM estimate, is made during which project management process group? A. Planning, B. Closing, C. Executing, or D. Initiating. The answer is D. Initiating. If you remember, rough order of magnitude was the widest range of estimates. Since we have the least information about the project in initiation process group, rough order of magnitude is used at this stage. Budget estimate was the second range of estimates, and it was done in planning. And the last one, definitive estimate, was the narrowest range of estimates, and it was done later in the project once things become clearer. Question 4. A Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, of 0.75 means A. Project is over budget. B. Project is ahead of schedule. C. Project is progressing at 75% of the rate originally planned. Or D. Project is progressing at 25% of the rate originally planned. The answer is C. Project is progressing at 75% of the rate originally planned. A is irrelevant because SPI is a Schedule Performance Index. We cannot derive any conclusion about budget performance of the project with this index. B is not correct because SPI is less than 1, and therefore the project is behind schedule. And D says that you've completed 25% of the work that you have originally planned, so it's not correct. The correct answer here is C, because an SPI of 0.75 means you've completed 75% of your work that you've originally planned. Question 5. A cost baseline is an output of which cost management process? A. Estimate activity resources. B. Estimate costs. C. Determine budget. Or D. Control costs. The answer is C. Determine budget process. Remember that cost estimations for each work package for each activity were done in estimate costs process, and these estimations were being aggregated in determine budget process in order to find the overall estimate for the project. Therefore, cost baseline is output of the determine budget process. Question 6. Your cost forecast shows that you'll exceed your planned budget at the end of your project. Which action should you take? A. Eliminate risks in estimates and re-estimate. B. Meet with the sponsor for extra funding. C. Cut quality. Or D. Decrease scope. The answer is A. Eliminate risks in estimates and re-estimate. First, you have to check whether there are any upcoming risks in your project. Because a risk you identified at the earlier phases of the project might have been eliminated, or the impact of the risk might have been reduced. For example, if there are reserves that you planned in the planning phase of your project in order to accommodate a risk when it occurs later in your project, and if probability of that risk has been eliminated, you won't need that reserve anymore, and you can use that funding in the project. Therefore, A is the first and best choice here. The three other options are the last choices that we have to think about in such a scenario. Question 7. Early in the life of your project, you're having a discussion with the sponsor about what estimating technique should be used. You want a form of expert judgment, but the sponsor argues for analogous estimating. It would be best to A. Agree to analogous estimating, as it is a form of expert judgment. B. Suggest life cycle costing. C. Determine why the sponsor wants such an accurate estimate. Or D. Try to convince the sponsor to allow expert judgment because it is typically more accurate. Here, the correct answer is A. Agree to analogous estimating, as it is a form of expert judgment. Since analogous estimating is a type of expert judgment, you can accept it. This is a tricky question. Question 8. A manufacturing project has an SPI of 0.89 and a CPI of 0.91. Generally, what is the best explanation for the reason of this situation? A. The scope was changed. B. A supplier went out of business and a new one needed to be found. C. Additional equipment needed to be purchased. Or D. A critical path activity took longer and needed more labor hours to complete. The answer is D. Because SPI is lower than 1 and CPI is lower than 1, so you are behind schedule and over budget. And the most probable reason for this is a critical path activity that took longer, which resulted to get behind at the schedule and needed more labor hours to complete. So you had to spend extra money, which resulted to go over budget in your project. Question 9. You provide a project cost estimate for the project to the project sponsor. He is unhappy with the estimate because he thinks the price should be lower. He asks you to cut 10% off the project estimate. What should you do? A. Start the project in order to not lose time and look for cost savings during the project. B. Meet with the estimators to cut 10% from their estimates. C. Inform the sponsor about which activities can be cut. And D. Add additional resources to project with low hourly rates. Here the answer is C. Inform the sponsor about which activities can be cut. Because you've built your scope baseline, you have built your schedule baseline, you've built your cost baseline, and during all these processes you've done estimations and planning, etc. If a sponsor asks you to cut the project estimates, this can only be done by reducing some activities or scope from the project. Therefore, C is the best choice here. Question 10. A project manager needs to analyze the project costs to find ways to decrease costs. It would be best if the project manager looks at A. Variable costs and fixed costs. B. Fixed costs and indirect costs. C. Direct costs and variable costs. Or D. Indirect costs and direct costs. Which one is the best choice? Here the answer is C. Direct costs and variable costs. If you remember, direct costs were the cost initiated directly with your project, so you can control them or you can decrease costs by taking actions on the direct costs. Variable costs were changing proportionally with the quantity of the resources you use, for example, materials or labor hours. Therefore, you can decrease direct and variable costs in your project. Fixed costs cannot be decreased. For example, even if you have 1 project resource or 5 project resources, you will need an office and the cost of office will be fixed. Fixed costs are typically cannot be decreased in projects. Indirect costs are not directly related with the project. For instance, taxes or management salary, etc. And these are not generally under the control of the project managers. Therefore, you cannot affect indirect costs and fixed costs in your project. Now, we have concluded the cost management knowledge area.